The moment he said my name, the cafeteria went dead silent. Lydia Halbrook, Graham Pierce declared from the top of a table, voice booming through the room. After 23 years, we're restructuring. You're out. Chairs scraped. Forks froze midair. I felt dozens of eyes on me, junior analysts, assistants, even the custodians who'd seen me stay late more nights than they could count. The new CEO loved theater, and today I was his performance. My heart hammered once, then steadied. I stood slowly, the air thick with disbelief. Right here, I asked, just loud enough for him to hear. He smirked. Transparency. Lydia, everyone deserves to know when dead weight is cut loose. That line hit harder than the firing. I saw a few people flinch, a whisper ripple through the crowd, but I didn't argue. Instead, I reached into my tote bag, found the small silver drive that never left my side, and held it up between two fingers. The light from the skylight caught it one flash of metal in the silence. "This is what you wanted," I asked. He nodded, enjoying himself. "All company files." Handed over. I stepped forward, placed the drive on the table where his hand rested. "They're all yours," I said quietly. He didn't notice that I hadn't looked afraid. He didn't notice that my hand didn't shake. He just smiled, convinced he'd won. I walked out before anyone could speak. Behind me, the room filled with murmurs, forks clinking again as if pretending the spectacle hadn't just happened. In the hallway, I could still hear his voice echoing dead weight. The words looped in my head as I passed the motivational posters, the ones I'd hung myself when the company was half its size. When the elevator doors closed, I exhaled for the first time. The silver drive was gone, but the system copies weren't. Every log, every timestamp, every authorization I'd ever signed still existed where no one thought to look. By the time I stepped into the sunlight outside, my humiliation had cooled into clarity. He'd just fired the one person who could prove what he'd spent years hiding, and the files would speak soon enough. When I first joined Markston Industries, it wasn't a skyline giant with glass walls and PR slogans. It was 3 rented floors above a freight warehouse near the Chicago River, and we shared one copier that jammed every other morning. The founder, Richard Markston, used to bring his own coffee from home because the machine downstairs burned everything it touched. He was rough around the edges, but he believed in people who could build things quietly and make them last. He gave me a desk by the window and a single instruction: keep us honest. So I did. Over the next 2 decades, I built the compliance architecture line-by-line contracts, vendor audits, procurement logs, safety reports, certifications. While others chased bonuses, I chased precision. The files became my world, each document a small promise that what we built wouldn't collapse under arrogance. Most nights, the office lights went out except for mine. I remember the hum of the servers, the soft thrum of the city through the glass. Once, when a shipment error almost cost us a government client, I stayed 40 hours straight, sorting through vendor codes until the numbers matched. No one thanked me, but the contract was renewed, and that was enough. When Richard retired, he shook my hand and said, "Don't let them forget what this place is built on." I promised I wouldn't. Then Graham arrived, polished, charming, fluent in buzzwords, but tone-deaf to ethics. He turned compliance into marketing, stripped procedures down to slogans. He said audits slowed innovation. I warned him that cutting corners wasn't efficiency. It was rot. He laughed, called me old school, and built his empire on speed. I kept the systems running anyway, patching leaks, rewriting policies, training interns who never remembered my name. Somewhere along the way, 23 years slipped past. The company grew taller, but the foundation stayed the same mine. And when he stood on that table and fired me, I realized he had no idea what he'd just severed. You can replace people, but you can't replace the hands that remember where every wire runs. The drive home felt like a blur of red lights and static. My phone kept buzzing HR notifications, automated exit surveys. A message from IT reminding me to return my badge. I ignored all of them. By the time I reached my apartment in Oak Park, the sun was already slipping behind the skyline, staining the windows gold. I dropped my bag by the door and stood in the quiet. For the first time in years, no deadlines waited, no alerts blinked from my phone. The silence should have been unbearable. It wasn't. I turned on a single lamp and sat at my desk, where a framed copy of the first compliance license hung slightly crooked. The date on it, April 2000, felt like another life. I powered on my old personal laptop, one I'd kept separate from company hardware. No forbidden files lived on it, only documentation system maps, procedural templates, emergency recovery outlines, all publicly compliant, all technically property of Markston, but mirrored under federal retention law for third-party audits. The originals were stored off-site, encrypted, verified, and untouchable without proper authorization. I opened a secure portal just to check the audit mirror status green lights across every node. The backups were safe, untouched, exactly as they should be. Then, carefully, I logged into the company's admin portal one last time. My credentials still worked, no one had revoked them yet. I began closing what I once built, terminated my multi-factor keys, revoked local privileges, cleared authentication cache. I left no trap, no sabotage. I simply withdrew. In a few minutes, I erased myself from their system. The heartbeat that had kept it alive mine was gone. When I closed the laptop, the room felt lighter. I poured a glass of water, stared out at the city, and listened to the hum of the elevated train rolling through the distance. The night smelled faintly of rain. Graham thought the smile I gave him was surrender. It wasn't. It was a warning he didn't understand, because I'd learned something over 23 years of watching men like him rise fast and fall faster. The truth doesn't vanish when you delete a name. It waits quietly, faithfully in the backups. By Monday morning, the first cracks began to show. I didn't have to check the company intranet to know. The messages found me instead. A text from Maya, one of the junior analysts I'd trained last year. Payroll's a mess. Half the team didn't get paid. It says the validation loop's stuck. Did you change something before you left? I smiled faintly, typing nothing. The validation loop wasn't broken. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do, wait for a second authorization that no longer existed. By noon, another message came from Eric. One of the older accountants' vendors are holding shipments. They're saying compliance signatures are outdated. I told Graham, but he says we'll just rebrand the system. Rebrand. That word made me laugh out loud, though it came out hollow. You can't rebrand infrastructure. You can't Photoshop legality. The news spread quickly across LinkedIn, the kind of corporate gossip wrapped in polite phrases. Transition challenges. Operational recalibration. Behind the euphemisms was panic. The quiet kind that seeps through office carpets when leadership starts shouting behind closed doors. By Tuesday, Graham replaced 2 senior managers, both veterans who had kept the finance and logistics units running for years with friends from his last startup. The kind who smiled too easily and said things like, "We'll fix it in the cloud." Fix it in the cloud? They never understood that the cloud only works because someone like me built the ground first. From my small apartment window, I could see Markston's tower glinting across the river, its logo still shining against the morning sun. It looked the same, but I knew better. Systems can keep humming long after they start dying. That's the trick. The rot begins quietly, beneath the dashboards and PowerPoints, spreading through forgotten access points until one day nothing responds. The messages slowed by midweek, replaced by silence. No one dared ask more questions. They were still pretending everything was fine, but I'd spent half my life inside that building, and I could feel it even from here. Markston was still standing, but it no longer had a heartbeat. It was Thursday afternoon when the call came. The number was unfamiliar. Washington area code, no name. I let it ring twice before answering. Ms. Halbrook. This is Evan Rosner, Senior Compliance Auditor with Hellstrom & Vale. We handle Markston Industries' annual review. His voice was calm, neutral, like a surgeon announcing a routine procedure. "We're seeing a few irregularities in your previous filings vendor transfers, unreconciled project accounts. We just wanted to confirm whether you're still overseeing those systems." I stared at the stack of unopened mail on my desk. "No," I said quietly. "I was terminated 5 days ago. No transition plan, no offboarding procedure. You should probably note that." A pause. Paper rustled on his end. "Terminated. Without transition." "That's correct," I replied. "The compliance structure hasn't been reassigned as far as I know." "If you're missing approvals." "That's why." Evan cleared his throat. "Understood. The discrepancies we found some vendor payments were routed through new accounts. They're labeled as infrastructure fees, but lack supporting contracts. That would require dual authorization," I said automatically. "One from finance, one from compliance, and the compliance signature would have been yours until last week." "Yes." Another silence. This one felt heavier. "Thank you. Ms. Halbrook, if possible. Could we follow up with a written statement?" "Of course. Just keep it factual. Dates, signatures, system references. No speculation." He hesitated, as if expecting me to ask what they'd found. I didn't. I didn't need to. The systems never lied. People did. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet for a long moment, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. The numbness I'd carried since that cafeteria scene began to fade, replaced by something steadier, a sense of inevitability. Outside, Chicago's late autumn sky had turned a hard blue, the kind that feels like glass before it cracks. I closed my eyes and breathed. Graham thought he'd erased me from the system, but the audit trail still had my name printed on every page. And sooner or later, someone was going to read it. By Monday morning, the call came again, shorter this time, more deliberate. Evan's tone had changed. "Ms. Halbrook, thank you for your earlier clarification," he began. "We've cross-referenced your archived compliance logs with Markston's live ledger. There are significant discrepancies." I let him continue. "Several vendor accounts were opened in the past quarter under shell entities' names nearly identical to legitimate contractors. Funds were routed through them, then withdrawn into private accounts tied to Graham Pierce's holding company." He paused, measuring each word. "The total exceeds $4 million. I stared out the window, watching the L train snake between buildings. "You have timestamps." "Yes. They match the internal access keys you registered years ago. The approval logs show your old digital signature copied, reused, but never authorized. Whoever did this thought deleting the original record would erase the trace. He didn't have to say the rest. They'd never understood how the system was built, how every audit trail was mirrored and sealed under the founder's compliance clause." "That clause," Evan added, as if reading my mind, "makes your archives admissible as the primary record of intent." It was signed by Richard Markston himself. I remembered the day he'd insisted on that redundancy, his hand shaking slightly as he initialed each page. "We safeguard truth, Lydia," he'd said, "even from ourselves." Now, years later, that safeguard was waking up. Evan's voice softened. "We'll be escalating this to the board. I'll note your cooperation." "Thank you," I said. "And Evan, make sure the report reflects the design intent. It's not revenge, it's compliance." He hesitated before replying. "Understood." When the line went dead, I exhaled slowly. The weight of years didn't lift. It shifted. Somewhere inside that tower across the river, alarms would be flashing, files cross-locked, accounts frozen for review. I hadn't said a single untrue word. I hadn't raised my voice or pointed a finger. I'd just let the system I built do what it was meant to do, record everything, even the lies. By Wednesday, the story had stopped being a rumor. The board had received Hellstrom and Vale's preliminary report marked urgent potential misrepresentation of financial activity. Within an hour, the corridors of Markston's executive floor turned into a holding pattern of whispered phone calls and locked doors. From my apartment window, I could see the top floors still lit long after sunset. The building looked like a ship stranded mid-river, glowing but motionless. Inside, according to a message I received from Maya, Graham had called an emergency meeting. Every senior director was summoned. His voice, she said, carried through the glass. "We're not panicking. We're managing optics." Optics. The word had become his favorite defense. Across the table, the General Counsel Margaret Holt, a woman I'd always respected for her restraint, had refused to sign any statement. "We can't deny what's in the audit," she said evenly. "If we issue a public reassurance before verifying, we risk compounding liability." Graham tried charm first, then impatience. "It's a misunderstanding. Margaret, the auditors are overreaching." She slid the folder back toward him. "Then you'll need to prove that, not declare it." The other directors avoided eye contact. No one wanted to be the next casualty of his confidence. Downstairs, staff were already hearing whispers the $180 million infrastructure deal with Ardent Logistics, the one Graham had promised would double Markston's footprint, was on hold. Their compliance team had frozen communication until the audit cleared. Without that contract, the quarter's projections would implode. In the silence that followed, Graham looked around the boardroom, demanding allegiance. No one moved. By nightfall, he ordered an internal statement drafted, insisting the discrepancies were legacy data conflicts. Margaret refused again, her tone sharper now. "You can't call theft legacy data. Graham, not when there's an audit trail signed in your name." Maya told me he slammed his laptop shut and walked out, muttering something about lawyers and loyalty. The next morning, I saw the news ticker crawl across my screen. Markston Industries delays financial disclosure pending review. The reckoning had begun, and it looked exactly like a spreadsheet. The emergency board meeting took place 3 days later in Markston's top-floor conference room, the one with the view of the river and the illusion of control. I wasn't there, but the details reached me before sunset. Maya's quiet updates, the kind that travel through back channels faster than press releases. Hellstrom and Vale's lead auditor, Evan Rosner, stood before the board with a stack of sealed reports and a small encrypted drive. He began with a simple sentence. "These are the mirror archives maintained under Markston's federal compliance clause." No one spoke. Graham tried to project calm, fingers drumming the polished table, but Margaret's stare didn't move. Evan connected the drive, the screens around the room flickering to life. Each folder opened like a confession vendor transactions, falsified invoices, transfer chains branching into shell companies that traced back a layer by layer. To Pierce Holdings LLC, every timestamp bore the same forgery, my digital signature, copied and reused after my termination. He explained how the founder's compliance clause, buried deep in the company's original charter, rendered those mirrored records admissible as the master source. The data wasn't hearsay. It was law. When the final report loaded, Evan spoke the words that would hang in that room long after he left. The files she kept, they expose his secret transfers. Silence followed. No one coughed. No one blinked. Outside, a barge passed down the river, horn echoing faintly against the glass. Margaret broke it first. "Mr. Pierce," she said evenly, "would you like to respond?" Graham opened his mouth, but whatever explanation he'd prepared collapsed under the weight of the evidence. The system he'd mocked for being too slow, too bureaucratic, too loyal to procedure had just recorded his downfall with perfect precision. The board voted to suspend him within the hour. HR was instructed to secure his office, revoke access, and begin public disclosures. That night, as I watched the building from across the river, the top floor went dark for the first time in years. The truth had done what I never needed to shut him down completely. The headline appeared on my screen before dawn. Markston CEO suspended amid financial probe. 180. Deal withdrawn. Below it, a photo of Graham leaving the building jacket over his arm. Expression hollow. No entourage this time. The caption called it executive leave pending investigation. I called it what it was, the end. I didn't feel triumphant. Relief. Maybe A strange, quiet kind of release that settled behind my ribs like an exhale I'd been holding for years. Justice doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like finally turning off a machine that's been humming too loud for too long. By noon, the news had spread through every industry outlet. Investors pulled out one by one. Ardent Logistics among the first. Without that contract, the company's stock froze. Trading suspended until further notice. The tower across the river looked the same, but something invisible had shifted inside it like a building after an earthquake, still standing but hollow. My phone began to buzz with messages. From Eric. You were right. Lydia. I should have said something sooner. From Maya. It's chaos here. People keep asking if you'll come back. Even Margaret sent a short note. Your systems saved us from worse. I hope you know that. I read each one slowly, then set the phone face down. I didn't need apologies. They weren't wrong to stay silent. I had stayed silent once too. Maybe we all learn the hard way that integrity only matters when no one's looking. That evening, I walked along the river path where I used to take my lunch breaks. The wind smelled like cold steel in late autumn. Across the water, the Markston logo flickered, one letter dark. For the first time, I noticed it wasn't the glow I missed. It was the quiet that followed when it finally dimmed. I thought of the years I'd spent defending that company's pulse, of the nights I'd kept it breathing when it should have been resting. Now it could finally stop, and so could I. Winter came early that year, painting the Chicago River in thin sheets of silver. By then, I had accepted a consulting position with Haven Compliance Group, a boutique firm run by people who still believed procedures meant something. My new office sat on the 5th floor of a converted warehouse brick walls. Tall windows, no slogans on the glass. From my desk, I could see Markston's tower across the river, its mirrored facade reflecting nothing back. The work felt different here, smaller scale, steadier rhythm. I met clients who wanted systems that lasted, not shortcuts dressed as innovation. Each day, I watched young analysts learn how to document everything properly, to leave trails instead of shadows. When they asked where I'd worked before, I just said, across the river, and left it at that. One morning, I printed a letter on company stationery, signed it neatly, and slipped it into an envelope. It was addressed to Markston's legal department, a formal termination of my custodial clause. The clause that had once given me authority over their entire compliance structure, the clause that had brought them down. I walked across the bridge, the wind sharp against my face. The lobby security guard didn't recognize me, which felt right. I left the envelope at reception, thanked the clerk, and turned back toward the door. Outside, the city was waking up, coffee carts steaming, buses rumbling along Canal Street. I paused at the railing overlooking the river. The water below moved slowly, carrying fragments of ice, steady and indifferent. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of old files or the echo of late-night emails. My life had become quiet again, but not empty. It was the kind of silence that meant balance, not absence. As I crossed back toward my office, I looked once more at Markston's tower. Sunlight caught its windows, cold and bright. I whispered to myself, barely audible beneath the wind, files remember what people forget. Then I unlocked my door with a new set of keys and walked inside.